We were promised a rational, self-governing utopia. The early 21st century was supposed to be the era where humanity finally shed ancient religious frameworks and flourished. But the clinical data from the last 2 decades suggests otherwise. Global rates of anxiety, depression, and nihilism have spiked sharply, trailing behind the highest levels of secularization in Western history. This is the result of expressive individualism, the idea that you are the sole author of your own meaning. On paper, it sounds liberating. In practice, it creates a crushing psychological weight. When you have no transcendent story to locate yourself within, the burden of manufacturing your own purpose becomes exhausting. This internal exhaustion is now colliding with an external disruption. By 2026, artificial intelligence is mastering cognitive work we once thought was uniquely human. Machines are drafting legal briefs, diagnosing medical conditions, writing code, and composing music with a speed no human can match. This exposes a structural flaw in our cultural identity. For decades, we have implicitly taught people that their worth is equal to their economic output. If your value is defined by what you produce, and a machine can now outproduce you in every category, your functional reason for existing becomes obsolete. We are entering an era where job retraining programs won't be enough to stabilize society. A secular worldview built on manufactured identity and economic utility is reaching its breaking point, leaving us with no framework to handle the reality of being outperformed by our own tools. To understand why more data won't solve this crisis of meaning, consider a botanist named Betty. Betty finds a red rose on her desk. She can analyze its cellular structure, document its chemical composition, and map its evolutionary lineage. But her biological data is useless for the only question that matters: why is it here? Her data can explain the plant, but it cannot see that the rose was left as a gift for Valentine's Day. Science explains the mechanism, but meaning is a different category entirely. Using scientific materialism to find the purpose of your life is like using a microscope to read a letter from a friend. The tool is simply not designed to see the intent. Some attempt to bypass this limit with simulation theory. This hypothesis suggests our finely tuned universe is actually a virtual reality generated by a technologically advanced civilization, perhaps a simulation running on an alien laptop. But this only delays the question. If we are a simulation, who created the programmer? Shifting the origin of the universe to a powerful computer provides no ground for objective morality or human worth. It just replaces a mystery with a high-tech middleman. Skeptics often treat ancient religious texts like a game of telephone, assuming stories were whispered and warped over centuries. But ancient oral cultures worked in public. Stories were recited in communal settings, where living eyewitnesses could and did actively correct the account in real time. We also know that trauma changes how memory functions. While you might forget a mundane Tuesday, you likely remember exactly where you were during a national tragedy. The execution of a revered teacher and the subsequent claims of his resurrection were psychologically shattering events that create indelible imprints, not hazy rumors. If we apply standard historical benchmarks, the evidence is striking. Consider Emperor Tiberius, the most powerful man of the 1st century. We have 4 biographical accounts for him, but nearly all were written over 100 years after his death. By contrast, the 4 biographies of Jesus were written within 40 to 60 years of the events. The letters of Paul bring that evidence even closer. By the standards used for any other ancient figure, the interval between the events and the records is extraordinarily short. We can see the physical results of this transmission in manuscripts like Papyrus 46. Dating back to the late 2nd or early 3rd century, it shows the meticulous care taken to preserve these letters, providing a physical link to the early movement. Dismissing these accounts as fairy tales requires us to assume ancient people didn't understand basic biology. They knew dead people stayed dead. That's exactly why the claim of a resurrection was so disruptive. Under standard historiography, these texts pass the same scrutiny we apply to the rest of the ancient world. Unlike urban legends that happen in remote areas, the resurrection was claimed in Jerusalem, the city where the tomb was located. If the body was still there, the Roman and Jewish authorities could have ended the movement instantly just by producing it. They never did. There is also the criterion of embarrassment. In that culture, the testimony of women was legally invalid. If you were inventing a myth to convince the public, you would never make women the primary witnesses to your foundational claim. The authors included that detail because they were committed to what actually happened, even if it was culturally inconvenient. But even with historical evidence, the visceral objection remains, the problem of evil. If a good God exists, why is there such profound suffering? To call a line crooked, you must first have a concept of what a straight line is. This is more than just a metaphor for morality. If evil is just a personal preference or a biological instinct, it has no objective power. To claim that an atrocity is actually wrong, not just something we dislike, you are appealing to a moral standard that sits outside of human opinion. If that objective standard exists, it requires a source that isn't just a product of our evolution. Paradoxically, to even argue that the world is evil is to rely on a framework where a moral lawgiver exists. Without that transcendent anchor, there is no evil, only events that some of us happen to find unpleasant. This historical evidence for a person entering time and space forces us to look at the origin of the universe differently. It points toward what philosophers call the unmoved mover, an uncreated, eternal first cause. If the stories of the resurrection are true, this first cause isn't a cold simulation, it's a personal author. This author provides the answer to our current identity crisis through the concept of imago Dei, or the image of God. Secular materialism tells you that you are the sum of your genetics and your economic output. But the framework of imago Dei claims that every person has profound, inviolable worth simply because they exist. It severs your value from your productivity. As machines inevitably take over the tasks we once used to define our importance, we need a ground for our identity that no computer can reach. Only a value that is divinely endowed can survive a world where human utility is no longer the primary measure of a person. The Christian worldview offers a foundation for the digital age. It is anchored in history that invites scrutiny and provides a story larger than any identity we could invent for ourselves. Like Betty the botanist, we can analyze the biological mechanics of the universe forever, but grasping our purpose requires a framework that can see past the cells and the chemistry to the intent behind them. The pursuit of truth does not lead to a cold, simulated reality. It leads to a universe with a deliberate author, an author who knows your name.